Hello everyone and welcome to FFD's step-by-step tutorial where we'll be showing you how to lay a penny floor. Here we have one of our clear epoxy resin products called FFD DPM. We'll be using this product for the first step, which is priming our existing background, as well as using it later on in the video as a clear sealer to finish the penny floor. To mix your DPM primer, pour the contents of the hardener container into the base container, making sure to get as much hardener out as possible. Then, using a slow speed drill and paddle, mix the resin thoroughly together. Once mixed, pour the DPM resin onto your background into the desired areas, making sure you achieve a uniform coating. Priming your floor is important if you have a porous, uneven, friable or damaged background. The epoxy primer will create a strong, impervious barrier between your existing floor and your new floor surface. When cured, the epoxy primer will look something like this. You may find some dry patches where it is sunken into your background. This shouldn't be a problem with this application, as the primer's primary use in this example is to strengthen your background. Once you have your cured, primed background, you can start applying the pennies. There's no real rules to follow on this part. You can use mastic, jointing compound, anything you like that will bond the pennies to the floor and hold them firmly in place. The same goes for the design. Many people use a honeycomb design where they interlock the pennies together, which is the simplest method. In this example, I use a grid design to give me a perfect square. I also use an assortment of 1, 2 and 5p coins in my design. This is to show you that you're not limited to any particular size of coin. When you've stuck all of your pennies onto the floor, it's time to fill in the spaces between them with floor grout. You can use any coloured grout you'd like for your floor, but we went for a dark charcoal grout. This is because we wanted to create a nice contrast against the shiny, lighter coloured pennies. It's advisable that you leave a bit of residue on the coins when grouting like we do in this video. This is so that you don't overwater the grout on the surface, and that you also don't wipe too much grout out from in between the pennies. Both can lead to problems with the overall finish if done incorrectly. The grout has now dried out completely, along with the residue we left on the pennies. As I slowly lift up the sample, you'll see that the grout is slightly down from the level of the pennies. This is why you'll want to leave a slight residue on the pennies. If I had removed the residue whilst it was still wet, the grout would be even further down, as well as weaker. The slight depth of the grout I have in this video adds a 3D element to the finish when sealed, which is the look I was trying to create. But you can always leave the grout more level if you want to use less resin for the sealer coat. To remove the grout residue from your pennies, simply use a tough, damp cloth or sponge to wet up the grout residue and remove it. Try and get as little water into the grout as possible, as any water you put into it will have to dry out completely before you can start with the next step, sealing your pennies. Once the grout residue has been removed, your penny floor should look something like this. When I lift my sample up, you should now be able to see a slight edge of the pennies. You shouldn't have any more depth than this, or it will start to create problems for you when sealing. Just like we did with the epoxy primer, we are going to add the contents of the hardener container into the base container, making sure to get as much hardener out as possible. Then, using a slow speed drill and paddle, mix the resin thoroughly together. In the video, I use a small palette knife to mix the resin. This is only because I can't mix this small amount with a drill and paddle. Once mixed, pour the resin sealer onto your floor. Use a brush to cut in around any edges you may have first. Then, using a high quality paint roller, roll the epoxy over the floor, making sure you back roll to uniform the surface. Make sure you pour the whole resin unit onto the floor immediately after mixing. This will give you more time to apply the resin before it cures. When you have finished applying your first sealer coat, your floor will look something like this. This first sealer coat has been applied in a small uniform coat over the whole surface. As you can see, the resin has been applied in a small enough coating that it hasn't entirely filled in the difference in depth between the grout and the pennies. This is the amount of epoxy resin you will want to apply to your floor. The first coat has now been left to cure for 24 hours. This is the recommended time to allow the resin to cure before walking onto its surface. As you can see, the resin has sunk into the grout in a few places over the whole area. This is why we apply the sealer in multiple small coats as opposed to one flood coat. If we had attempted to coat this area in one flood coat of resin, these dry patches where the sealer has sunken into the background would have released its trapped air from inside of the grout, which would likely cure in the resin in the form of bubbles. Now that the grout has had a coat of resin applied onto it, these dry patches should no longer be an issue, as they will be filled up with resin in the next sealer coat. Once the first sealer coat has been left to cure for at least 24 hours, we can now apply the second sealer coat. The process for mixing the sealer is the same as before. Simply pour the contents of the hardener container into the contents of the base container and mix thoroughly with a slow speed drill and paddle. When mixed, simply pour all of the mixed epoxy sealer onto your surface. As we did with the first sealer coat, cutting around any edges you may have first using a paintbrush. Then, using a high quality short piled paint roller, distribute the epoxy resin evenly over your area, making sure you back roll until a uniform surface is achieved. Once you've finished applying your second sealer coat, your floor will look something like this. Similarly to the first sealer coat, the second sealer coat has been applied in a small, uniform coat over the whole surface. Where the first sealer coat didn't fill in the difference in depth between the grout and the pennies, the second coat has topped these low spots up so that the epoxy resin surface is nearly level. Now that the second sealer coat has been left to cure for 24 hours, you can see what the surface looks like when cured. Unlike the first sealer coat onto bare grout, the resin has not sunk into the background. This now means that the surface is fully sealed. Any sealer coats applied after this point are for creating a level surface only. Now the second sealer coat has been left for 24 hours to cure, we can now apply the third sealer coat. Exactly the same as earlier in the video, pour the contents of the hardener container into the base container, making sure you scrape as much hardener out as possible. Mix the combined base and hardener solution thoroughly together using a slow speed drill and paddle. When mixed, pour the resin onto your floor and apply in the same method as the previous two coats. While the resin sealer is still liquid after applying your third sealer coat, your floor should look something like this. The sealer should now be level across your floor, as the resin sealer should now cover the highest points in your penny surface. If you still haven't got the level finish you require, you can always apply another sealer coat to build up the thickness of the sealer. Once the third sealer coat has been left for 24 hours to cure, your floor surface will be completed. Here are some close-ups of the final result of my penny sample. You can achieve this finish on a number of different applications, from decorative floors to countertops and bar tops, all using the same method as shown in this tutorial video. Throughout this video, I have shown you what this penny surface looks like in a room with no windows, using only artificial white light as my light source. Here's a clip to give you an idea of what a penny floor looks like in a room lit up by daylight only. This concludes our step-by-step tutorial on how to lay a penny floor. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to see our latest videos first. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.